Okay, now, Diane, you've been out and about, and it's been quite incredible that in going to some academic events, you have stumbled really into the belly of the beast, which would silence alternative media. And also, it's working hard to create waves of change in our society. Tell us about where you've been and what you've discovered.
Yes, so yesterday I was at an event, a whole day of events actually, at the University of York. So they have a yearly event which is called the York Festival of Ideas, which is kind of a range of things that sort of go on for, in this case, it was from the 31st of May to the 13th of June. I think it says over 150 free events to educate, entertain, and inspire. Now, you might wonder why they would offer 150 free events. And so I decided it was a really important thing to look at how they're actually funding these. So if we look at, these are a couple of pages directly from the official program for the entire event. So the University of York is obviously the main sponsor. They get their money through research funding, which I'll look at in just a minute, Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and the train service LNER, which is part of a major train operator up here in the north. So if we look at some of these funders in particular, the Higher Education Innovation Funding is the particular funding scheme from the UK government's Research and Innovation, part of the UK Research Councils, that funds these kinds of programs. And this has a budget overall of £260 million. Obviously, not all of this went to the University of York, but a lot of it did go to funding these events. And the point of this type of innovation funding is what universities call knowledge exchange, which basically means that the universities feel that they have a responsibility to share whatever their work is at the university with the wider public, which then invites people from the public to be able to do things like this and come into the university for free and see what they've been doing. Another funder that was listed on that page from the program is also, so we can put that up here, is another foundation, which is called the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And Joseph Rowntree was an important person in the history of York. You can look him up if you're interested. But he was known at the time as a philanthropist. And so several of these trust-related organizations that he created have really evolved over time. And now it says that their mission is that they are a social change organization. So going back to what Ben was saying earlier about social change not being up to any good, it says that this part of their mission as well is to speed up the transition to a more equitable and just future where people and planet can flourish. So we're seeing, once again, Sustainable Development Goal language, Agenda 2030, UN language built into this sort of local charity that has been a major funder for the Festival of Ideas. And we can also see that part of the program, the overall the program was called Making Waves for this entire 2-week period. So this year was the 100th anniversary of Joseph's death. And so they've got 2 programs that have been particular to honor him. One is about benefits of economic growth, and one is about sustainable futures through regional growth. So again, we're seeing this globalist language coming straight through into this particular event. Now, what I went to on Sunday in particular was, again, there were so many things, you can't go to all of them, but if we go into what I was actually attending on Sunday, was this series of 3 panels. So I've got just some photos here to kind of show just what it was like on the day. You can see there's kind of a big open area where there were several exhibitions, and a lot of these were for children, which was kind of at odds with the panels that I attended. But anyway, I'll just take you through some photos of what they were doing for children. I can talk about this a little bit more in extra as well. So if we go through these photos, different academic departments, research programs, the ancient crops, future food, plants, and prehistory. So there were things on history and archaeology. We can go through these fairly quickly. We can just go one by one. Some robots. They invited me to come play with the robots, the remote-controlled robots that I was allowed to spin around on the floor a little bit. Don't know the purpose of them, but there they were. We have, what else do we have? LNER. So again, the train service, that's one of the sponsors of the Festival of Ideas. They had a setup for children, building wooden trains, and you could have sheets for coloring on trains that colored pencils out for the children to play with. This was from archaeology, so pieces of ancient buildings and stone walls and so on from around Yorkshire and the area. So some little bit of archaeology research for children. Originally, I thought this was part of an art department, but it was actually maths and physics, looking at different structures and how the pieces fit together in nature. And they wanted to know if these actually occur in crystals or other natural materials. And so they were having the children try to play with those. We have some bones from animals. So again, the archaeology department allowing children to see these things and put their hands on things directly. We have, what's the next one we have here? The History Archive. Yes, so this was all about looking at the archives and trying to get children to challenge them to see if they could read very old handwriting to understand if it was possible for them to see what the words were at different levels of complexity. At the Ancient DNA Lab, this actually was encouraging children to sort of share their DNA, which is a little bit scary, considering what we know about some of the genetics programs that have been going on recently, but that was part of the fun, apparently. And there's the Zoo Archaeology Lab. So once again, looking at, sort of animals from history and kind of what this meant for science. So not all terribly bad, but again, really different from what I would have expected from the panels that I was attending. Here's one more from the Stable Isotope Lab next to the Ancient DNA Lab. So getting children, I guess, trying to get them interested in science, engineering, and all these different disciplines that they offer at the university. Now, to go to the grown-up part of the day, which took place in the same location, the same venue. This was the series of 3 panels that I attended. The entire day of panels was called A World in Crisis, ? Asking questions about democracy and so on. So this was, there were 3 panels that I attended throughout the day. If we go on to the funding, I'll come back to the panels in just a minute. The major funder for this organization was the Morrell Center for Legal and Political Philosophy at the University of York. They used to be called the Morrell Center for Tolerance. So you could go into a long sort of academic rabbit hole to figure out what tolerance actually means. But you can see at the top, it used to be the Morrell Center for Toleration. Their website has not been updated for about 10 years, as far as I can tell. But they have changed their name in recent times to Legal and Political Philosophy. So there are, again, 3 panels. The second and the third one I will talk about in extra. So there was some interesting and very alarming geopolitical discussions that took place in those. So I've just got photos of those 2 for now. Here's a panel called A New World Order, ? And so some of the people included Evie Espinel, for example, used to work with UN Women UK, and there's some academics on the panel. And the other one that was at the end of the day was the next one was, Is Europe Safe? ? And again, we have some academics and a lot of the media people that were part of these panels were contributors to The Guardian and other very mainstream sources. But the one that I want to focus on in the main news, because there's so much here to talk about, and hopefully I can get some reaction from Ben and Brian at the end of this, was this one called, and this is the particular one that I was the most interested in, this is the first one in the morning, called Disinformation, Polarization, and the Future of Democracy. So there was, in their opinion, a particularly illustrious panel. And what they were doing was splitting themselves up into presenting us with the problems that they see, and then from there, trying to give us solutions about what they see are the problems. So let's break this down a little bit more. If we go into the people that were participating in the panel, so the chair of the panel was this lady called Joan Concannon. She is the Director of External Relations for York University, which is a quite high up position in any university. Looking at, you see here, that part of her job is supporting delivery of institutional objectives, income generation, advocacy, reputation, global and local partnership, and stakeholder engagement. So at any UK university, this is a very important role, a very strategic role for a number of reasons that I can go into another time. The 2 panelists that presented us with explaining what the problems are, the first one was Dr. Christopher Featherstone, who's an associate lecturer at the University of York in the politics department. He's been a contributor to The Conversation, which is sort of an academic propaganda website, if you ask me, France 24, LBC. He had a lot to say about Trump, as all of these people did, actually, for the whole day. So positioning himself as an expert on foreign policy in the US and the UK. Professor Aurelien Mondon, I hope I'm saying that correctly, is a professor at the University of Bath. He talked about reactionary politics, used a lot of, in my opinion, rather polarizing language, which I thought the point of the panel was to overcome polarization. But anyway, if we go to the next slide, I've got a photo here of a book that he co-authored just a couple of years ago called Reactionary Democracy, How Racism and the Populist Far Right Became Mainstream. So he is the first author on that book. And we can also see that his publisher, Verso Books, is advertising, just by coincidence, the top of the page, that they are celebrating Pride Month with 30% off their Pride Month reading list. So those were the first two panelists, and they presented what they saw are the problems. So let's take a look at what they said the problems were. This is a very quick summary. This isn't everything, but here are the main things that I took away from it. These are direct quotes. The problem is that people are believing different sets of facts. So they're not saying that every set of fact is wrong. They're just saying that there are sets of facts, and some of us are believing the wrong ones. There was a lot of criticism about Trump being the problem. One of them called him an empty core, and they made jokes about the, quote, rubbish he says. They said Trump lacks an ideology, and this is part of what leads to disinformation, that other American presidents before him had an ideology, which I guess somehow may have stopped disinformation. They talked quite a bit over and over and over again about the rise of the far right, the problems with populism. Nigel Farage was mentioned, of course. The rise of inequalities and the climate crisis are all part of the problems that we need to solve. So we've got all these terrible problems. Okay, so what do we do to solve it? So who is going to tell us about this? Well, now we have Alexander Hurst, who is an American who has lived in Paris for a very long time, a Guardian contributor. He looks like he's, maybe about, I don't know how old he is, but he doesn't look old enough to have a memoir. Anyway, he has one coming in 2026, which is called Generation Desperation. And the main part of the story is that he basically won and lost $1.2 million trading meme stocks during 2020. But so he goes, I don't know, the book isn't out yet, but he talked about desperation capitalism and all of the other mainstream sources that he was sort of supporting. So the highlight of the panel, I guess we could say, was this lady herself. Her name is Jessica Cecil. She is the non-executive director of Digital Catapult, but she is much more than that. She has a 30-year career in her past, being a BBC veteran and working in a number of roles. She positions herself as a media industry leader and an expert in the field of disinformation. Now, if you look back at UK column reports from, I think, 1 or 2 years ago, you will see the Trusted News Initiative. And Jessica was responsible for founding and creating this Trusted News Initiative, which, of course, is founded by the BBC. She's got a whole other list of things on her CV, but let's take a look at the Trusted News Initiative very quickly. Beyond Fake News, BBC Trusted News Initiative. So it tells us exactly that this is who we're supposed to trust. And don't worry, the BBC and the partners along with them are going to be the ones to make sure that we're all doing the right things. So this is just a screenshot of just some of the many partners that are part of this Trusted News Initiative. So we see the major Associated Press, CBC, which is the BBC equivalent in Canada. We see the tech companies like Meta, Google, Financial Times, Twitter, which of course needs to be updated. They haven't changed that to X. That's a little bit old now. Reuters, Microsoft, the Washington Post, all some of our favorites that are part of these trusted partners under her Trusted News Initiative. So what did they have to say about what the solutions are? Well, let's look at again, these are just the quick takeaways from yesterday. Basically, a lot of this came from Jessica saying that one piece of legislation is not enough. We need a much, much bigger plan to combat what she calls disinformation. And she says, well, of course, because it's her organization, the Trusted News Initiative has defined, for the good of the people, a subset of disinformation that poses an immediate threat. And she gave election results as an example of what can happen that could go terribly wrong if there is disinformation that's being spread out there without their permission. And then they can alert the big tech companies like Meta and supposedly, I guess, X now, maybe, and TikTok, all the major social media platforms. And the other person who was the other respondent to expressing the solutions, the one who's the Guardian writer and so on, he said that the intervention and regulation need to be things that set the culture. And here was the really scariest part for me, one of the scariest parts out of all of it, that we really need to pay attention to, is that he said that social media private companies such as X and TikTok should be banned, X and TikTok should be banned completely, and that social media to be the only sources for media content in Europe and the UK, because it's to him, it's overwhelmingly obvious that the information that comes from public media is so much more trustworthy than anything that any other private organization could possibly find out on its own. So that is particularly of interest. Now, what happened from here was I decided, of course, I had to ask a question in the question and answer session. And so I asked, and I was taking a lot of notes and paying very close attention. And I asked why they said far right several times throughout the panel as being the problem. Never once did I hear the terms far left. And I asked, well, how can we solve with polarization if this is supposed to be a panel on polarization and the future of democracy? Then maybe we shouldn't be talking about far left or far right at all. And that maybe we should just return to having civil debate in our society to figure out what the problems are and what to do about them and how to save democracy. They had a very, very defensive response to my question. One of them told me the far left doesn't matter because the far right is in power, so we don't even need to talk about the far left. Jessica herself, the Trusted News Initiative lady, looked me in the eye, which is in a big lecture hall, and she still looked at me directly from down at the bottom of the floor, and she said she did not use the term far right. So maybe she didn't, but the rest of them certainly did several times. And there was then the conversation kind of drifted a bit, talking about building local trusted media sources. So I guess, I don't know, maybe some of these new government structures that Ben covered will be providing our media in the future. There was also, it drifted to why there was so much panic about a trans girl in Florida who wanted to play sports on the girls' teams. I don't know where that came from. But the really interesting, exciting, and I want to say good part of it all was that several people came up to me after the session, after I asked my question, and thanked me because they said, you got it right on, because nobody was talking about this. Nobody was talking about the fact that they spent the whole time attacking far right and far right populism, and the question of whether left and right actually exist is a really good question, especially because if we were trying to look at the future of democracy and how to fight polarization, but actually all it turned into was them talking a lot about the far right and fighting disinformation and saying that these sources, including the BBC and all of their trusted partners, are the ones who are going to be telling us the right things, and that everything else needs to be stopped through government control and shutting down private companies and any sort of competition. So with all of that, Ben and Brian, I would love to hear your response to any of this.
Well, Diane, the first thing for me to say is thank you so much for attending that event, because this is brilliant intelligence as to what the other side are thinking and doing. And you've also demonstrated by asking some good questions, the panic that then ensues amongst these people when you challenge them in the right way, reasonable, direct questions. This throws them into no man's land because nobody is supposed to challenge them. So, one, you attended, you learnt what they're up to, and we've shared that with our audience today. But then you've gone further and demonstrated the panic that when you challenged them. And then what happened? You got support from people there. So in one event, Diane, you're demonstrating all the things which UK Column would love all of our members to be doing, which is getting out there, finding out what's happening, getting amongst it and challenging it. Because I'll just end really this segment on the parish councils, which Ben pointed out. They are targeting parish councils because they're very worried about bodies that control and support local communities. So the power of the Rowntree organisation or any of these other big organisations, they are huge. They're very powerful in political sense, in a social change sense. But who do they need to control? Individual people at the bottom of the pile at local community level. So when people say, we know what you're doing and we're not having it, this is a huge problem for them. I'll just let you respond to that briefly, Diane, but I am clock watching.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I think it's a perfect example of how we do have the power to take back the power that belongs to us as the people. And I'm really happy, especially after such an interesting event yesterday, that we will be having our next live event in York on the 18th of October, because it's pretty clear by some of the local people that were there that see what's going on. And I think it will be a perfect opportunity, hopefully, for them to come and attend our event and get to meet other people. And then we can all kind of work against this together. So I think it's not all entirely a bad thing.
And have fun, work together and have fun. Now, I'm just going to end and say our message is clearly beginning to resonate with the UK column audience, because over the weekend, I think it was, I had an email. Yes, it was on Saturday. I had an email come in where somebody said, I've found this organisation, they're part of it, aren't they? Well, I had a quick look. Here's Neon. What a lovely group of people. So a big thank you to the UK column viewer for supplying this. And they are clearly seeing what we're seeing. This organisation believes that building movements, these are change movements, is central to winning social justice. That's social justice for them, not us. And if you have a look at the funders, the one that should jump out immediately is the Open Society Foundation. So Mr. Soros has got his tentacles in here, plus many of these other organisations. So let's end there on a very positive note, that it's clear that UK column viewers, at least, are now seeing what's really attacking them in this country. Yes, we should be worried and concerned for people overseas in Gaza or Ukraine or America even, as their societies come under attack. But if we're going to stay safe in this country, we need to see the threat that our own government is building with our money, our own money. We'll be doing a lot more on this, and I just want to thank you, Diane, and you, Ben, for such a comprehensive news today. Now, if you're a UK column member, you'll be able to join us for extra time in a few minutes, where we're going to go through some of these issues at a slower, more jovial pace. And that's one of the big advantages of being signed up to the UK column. You can enjoy UK column extra, where we cover a whole variety of issues in a very different style, but lots of good information. That's it for all today's news. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us wherever you are in the world. We'll be back for another UK column on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. See you then. Bye-bye.